takes two of you to replace Lord.
I'd like to call the meeting to order of October 10th, Environmental Transportation Advisory Committee. May we all stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Gil, would you like to say that for us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we have the consent calendar, A, B, and C. We have the approval of the minutes from the meeting of September 12th. Are there any comments or additions or omissions?
I move we approve it. Second that.
That was for Carl approved it and Bruce seconded it.
Just a quick question. Do we need to have public comment noted in the minutes? Oh, it looks like it was mentioned as overall public comment up at the top. So I'm okay with that. Usually they're mentioned directly and related to the item, but I'm okay with it being up at the top.
There's also comments H.
Okay, so the next item is excuse app. Oh, we need to vote. What is this, my 12th meeting? Thank you. May I have a vote, please?
Is the vote for the entirety of the consent calendar?
Well, I thought so. That's the reason I was going to excuse absences, because I thought the vote was ABC, and it's not just done on A, approval of minutes. So I was corrected by our today's secretary. Okay? So may we go to excuse absences? Would you report the excuse absences?
Michael Matthews is out today.
And that is an excused absence.
Yes.
Okay, so now I move for the consent calendar to be approved. Do I have a motion?
Okay, don't you have a motion on the table right now? So we're at the vote right now, so all those in favor?
Was the motion for... Yeah.
No, I believe the motion was to approve the minutes, and then we now are making an adjusted motion that would approve the A, B, and C of the consent calendar. So that is the motion on the table.
Okay, I move that we accept A, B, and C.
And that's done by Carl and second by Bruce.
All those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And we need coffee. Okay. We do have the opportunity to take public comments early, don't we, before the meeting?
Yes, you do.
Yes, I do.
It's up to your discretion to take it.
So we have guests here, and we have two guests that would like to speak on the tree removal and replacement. So may we hear the public comments on that prior to our presentation, or would you like to make your public comments after the presentation? I'm asking my guests, Mr. Cho and Mr. Christensen.
We can speak after.
Very good. Okay, so for a new business calendar, tree removal and replacement, item D. Tay?
Hi, good morning, Chair, and members of the committee. Southern California Edison approached us with a request to reuse a conduit in Segerstrom. In order to, they determined that in order to reuse that conduit, they would have to remove a mature queen palm tree. And if I could refer you to your packet, it is, it should be visible there. on Exhibit B. That's the queen palm tree that they're planning to remove. We are recommending denial of that. The pattern of the median, this is in the median in Segerstrom. The pattern of the trees out there goes from camphor tree, queen palm, camphor, down the whole stretch, and to remove this tree would kind of disrupt that pattern. We felt like, although it's a more inconvenient and more expensive option, they could do a more direct connection that doesn't go through the median and doesn't disrupt trees. So anyway, so that's the basis of our recommendation. If the commission decides that the tree removal would be permissible, then we would require 3 24-inch box trees of a size and of a type to be determined to be delivered or planted as close as we could in the area. It would be hard to get a tree exactly in this same spot because we'd run into the same problem at a later date. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions, or we could entertain the comments.
Does our committee have any questions?
Yes, talking about this conduit.
This is Carl speaking.
Yes, thank you. Carl Benich, thank you. How big of a conduit do they want to put in? And I don't understand why they need to take the whole tree out to get through it.
The size of the conduit, I'm not sure. It's relatively small. I mean, they can tell us on that. It's relatively small, but the tree, you can tell from Exhibit C, is planted within just a few feet of where the conduit is, and it is. I'm not sure that it's crushed, but they couldn't get a kind of an exploratory mandrel that they try to push through. They couldn't get that through the existing conduit. So, in a sense, it's the existing conduit that's there is useless to them. They wanted to remove the tree so they could replace that section of conduit.
So my question is, if they're going to, per their request, remove it and plant 3 24-inch box trees, where are those box trees? Because it doesn't look like that space can take 3 trees.
You're right, Chair. It would not be in that particular space. And again, I don't think even in that space we could plant one. If we did, it would have to be offset from where the existing one.
Right, because I see the camphors are leaves and limbs are almost touching the palm.
Right, that's correct. And so very often what we do is if we can't plant the tree in that particular area, we'll require the applicant to deliver them to the yard, and then we find a spot. Staff will find a spot somewhere in the area to replace.
So we have a drought, and we were talking about any new trees planting to by Edison or by any vendors or projects to make sure that the new trees have a deep root watering system. So if they're just delivering them to the yard, we have no way because we're not watering new plant trees at this time because we have no new plant trees. So that would mean that we would have to haul a water truck out to replant these 3 new trees they give us.
Good.
And we don't know where we're planting them, and we don't have any drip water system to them, and nobody's paying for the drip water system to these new 3 trees.
That's correct.
Okay. Gil?
So a quick question around the, there's just a note about the damage to the pavement. If we go with the other option of laying the conduit to the side of the tree or in another location, can you just talk about what the damage to the pavement would be, and is that part of the additional cost for Irvine Ranch, or is that something
Yes.
that we would also bear?
Yeah, and most likely what would happen is The let's see if you can refer to this larger drawing, Exhibit D. In fact, let me try it like this. The location where they're starting from is over here, closer to the intersection of the street. And so then they would go on directly across, more directly across the street. So they'd have to dig a big bore pit here, and then again on the other side. So it's hard to say. We haven't seen any kind of exact drawings, but they would take out a lane over here and take out a lane over here during the construction, and then they would just have to repair probably that bus pad, and then some of the asphalt on the other side of the street, wherever these pits are. So.
And can you just talk a little bit about what the conditions of the street are for multiple years after repairs done? Does a repair of the asphalt end up becoming precipitous in terms of additional repairs needed in that area, or is it just, does it end up holding up the same as just our normally paved streets are that have been unrepaired?
Yeah, I would say in general it comes pretty close to holding up. I think our standards are such that it will do a pretty good job. We also require trench cut fees in situations like this, so that helps with the long-term maintenance of streets. There are situations where we have, if it's a trench, you'll see trench failures, 6 months after, a year after. These will be more of rectangular cuts on both sides of the streets. And again, we have had problems with those, but I think our inspection methods are such, and the quality of the work is typically good enough where we don't have big problems. And again, I'm saying typically, we've seen situations where they've failed, but typically they're better.
Well, that has to do with, I'm sorry, Gil. That has to do with compression of the soil underneath, correct?
That's a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, and is there a standard that we compress to?
We do, and it's depending, it's 90 and 95%.
Sorry.
Can you just talk a little bit about ballpark figures of what the costs are for the two options for Vine Ranch?
I
like
don't,
what the difference is?
I don't have a number on what those would be. Maybe the applicant might have ballpark ideas on what those would be. And
so yeah, I would ask the applicant to include that in their comments. What the difference is for the for laying the conduit in the alternative location. I'll just say that I'd be in favor of removing the palm tree and finding a way. One of the things that I'm seeing on this street is that the sidewalks in this area have very few trees, and it looks like there are a few tree sites that were cemented over, and so finding a way to plant the additional trees in the sidewalk, specifically in this area, especially in the fall, and ensuring that our new deep root watering guidelines are followed so that they can be properly watered. To me sounds like a much better option. The queen palm, as Janelle mentioned, is already kind of wedged in there between these other trees, and taking out lanes concerns me, and having a possibility of failures in the asphalt at some future date concerns me. And so my preference would be that we approve removing the trees as long as the replacement trees are all planted in that area and that they're planted with enough deep root irrigation, that they're following the new deep root irrigation guidelines so that they can be properly watered. So that would be my preference.
Well, just following up on that, the street's going to get cut one way or the other, correct? Whether they remove the tree or whether they go around the tree.
I believe that they can do the work if it's just conduit replacement in the existing location. I believe they can do that work without cutting the street. The plan here that I'm looking at doesn't show the limits of the pavement replacement.
Can I request that maybe the applicant make some comment regarding some of the questions that we've had? It just seems like we're...
Sure. If I can pass off this handout, it's a figure
Would you
showing
be
the
so kind to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Harry Cho with Irvine Ranch Water District. Sorry. And if I may pass out this handout showing a figure, it's a Google Street View showing that street. So this is a street view figure showing Segerstrom Avenue at 2300 West Segerstrom. The tree is the palm tree shown in the center of the figure. To the left is the IRWD well site. This whole project started with IRWD doing some rehabilitation work at the well site itself. When that rehabilitation project started, Edison as well wanted to replace their service conduit and wire going through the conduit across the street. When that Edison replacement work started, they mandreled that conduit. It's a 4-inch conduit that's going across, and they found that pulling the mandrel, they couldn't pull it fully across the street, found the obstruction underneath the palm tree. So right now, we're still at the investigation phase. The tree removal would have to happen, but we would have to pothole that area, excavate in the median, and see what kind of potential damage there is in the median. And if once we determine the damage that's occurred there, we want to do a repair of that conduit in the median. As you can see, the Edison main is across the street, and it's actually right along the curb line or the sidewalk, and the Edison vault is in the sidewalk itself. So if we were to go across the street, we would have to come across the street from the curb or the sidewalk and go across the street into our property itself. We've been in contact with Edison yesterday regarding their requirements for potentially trenching across the street or boring across the street. And preliminarily, they would like the Edison, any new Edison conduits to be below all of the street utilities. And if that's the case, the existing storm drain the top of pipe is 6 to 7 feet deep. And there's a IRWD water line across the street that's about 10 to 11 feet deep to the top of pipe. And that pipe is 54 inches in diameter. So the bottom of the pipe would be approximately 15 feet deep. So any potential Edison conduits would have to be below 15 feet deep. That would require a fairly deep excavation, whether by open trenching across the street or boring across the street. We are proposing to remove the tree, do the excavation inside the median, do some exploratory work, determine the amount of damage to the conduit, and do a repair once that damage is determined. There will be a lane closure as a result of this. It may be up to a week, maybe more than a week, depending on the amount of damage, but it hopefully it will be limited to the center median area. If we were to go across the street itself, that would require lane closures on all 4 lanes. Segerstrom is a fairly busy street, and it looks like it's arterial as well, so the lane closure probably won't be the full day, maybe 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., which would restrict hours, which would lengthen out the project itself. And as well, if we were to go with the boring option, as Mr. Higgins mentioned before, there would have to be pits in the street. And due to the depth requirements of Edison, that would have to be fairly deep. We'd have to get it underneath the 10 to 12 feet deep pipeline that's shown in blue in Cedarstrom. And yeah, and the boring pit on the other side of the street for the SCE main conduit is fairly close to the sidewalk and the adjacent homes as well, and the block wall. Are there any questions?
So, Mr. Cho, you wanted to speak. Is there anything else at this time, since you're at the microphone, that you'd like to add to this project?
No. For the exploratory work and for tree removable, we're proposing to replace the trees. Mr. Higgins mentioned that potentially there are 3 trees to replace the one existing tree. RWD is willing to offer 3 trees. If they can be planted in the median, we're willing to do that. We can warranty that for a period of a year. If the replacement tree is not planted in the median, we can give the city of Santa Ana the 3 trees for their use to be planted at a different location at any time. We can warranty those trees as well. So we are willing to work with the city of Santa Ana for tree removal and replacement. I've talked to a contractor as well. The queen palm is a fairly shallow root tree, and it can be dug up and boxed and stored as well. So if this one particular tree would like to be kept for possible replacement back into this center median, we can do that. We can dig it up, box it, store it somewhere, and then come back after the exploratory work is done and replant it.
Mr. Cho, would you please remain at the microphone while I have a question to Mr. Higgins? We have 16 trees in this median, and at this time, are these 16 trees part of our tap and go? Are they part of the deep root, or what situation are these 16 trees?
Do you know?
We don't have anybody from street maintenance that could answer that definitively.
So, Mr. Cho, in terms of possible, instead of taking 3 trees or a replacement tree, we have 16 trees here that need a watering system that is a deep root watering system for these 16 trees. And I believe there's already a watering system there. It's just a matter of conversion. Would you like to have 30 days to look into the cost of that and see if that is an option to come back to us? That if you remove the tree, then you do not have to replace that tree or 3 other trees, but instead take the median where there are 16 trees now and offer a quality deep root watering system?
Yes, we can take a look at it and get back to you.
So we have another speaker. Would we like to listen to the other speaker at this time? Eric Christensen.
Eric Christensen with Pascal Ludwig Constructors. The one issue I think Tag had touched on was that's the Southern California Edison conduit. Replacing the tree over it, it could be at least another 20, 30 years at minimum before that conduit may collapse. The idea of the collapse of the damage of the conduit was during the installation of an 18-inch water line. So the tree can be replaced in its existing condition. Digging the bore pits and the receiver pit for boring would be fairly extensive if we have to go to the depth that we're talking about. The boring machine is about 21 feet long, takes about 12 feet wide to operate it, and we would have to actually dig down and drop the equipment into the pit to be able to get to the depths that we're talking about if we encroach into the city sidewalk, curb and gutter area. So the boring and is quite extensive, probably as extensive as trench cutting across the street when you talk about to the extent and the scale.
Gillard.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve removal of the Queen Palm tree, dependent on Irvine Ranch District working with city staff to install a drip irrigation system in that median to water the remaining trees.
Not a tap and go, a drip system.
Correct. So the motion is to approve removal of this tree, dependent on the Irvine Ranch District working with city staff to install a drip irrigation system for the remaining trees in the median with the cost covered by the Irvine Ranch District.
With an estimated 16 trees?
With whatever trees are in that median. And that if that solution doesn't work, that it comes back to ETAC.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, and may I have the vote, please?
There's one more comment on it. When you say remove, are we talking about boxing this tree and bringing it back later? Is that in your proposal?
No.
Because for the health of the tree, is that feasible with that tree? To box and bring it back?
I think it's possible.
Because to me, that's the best solution of all. You move the tree, you fix your problem, put it back. Go ahead.
What's the concerns about bringing the tree back in the same location?
The gentleman just mentioned it could be boxed and brought back in. Is that what you were referring to, please?
Yes, it is. I talked to a landscape contractor, and he thought it was possible.
Are there concerns about the conduit being under that tree once again?
The Queen Palm has a fairly shallow root system, and the electric conduits typically don't fail. So this is unusual for electrical conduit, and it's our luck that this happened.
So I'll entertain a friendly motion to amend that motion and require that the applicant box the palm tree and replace it on completion of the project.
But still remaining with the deep root watering.
Yes.
And I'll second that amendment.
Okay, we've had discussion, second, and now may I have a vote, please? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Thank you, Mr. Christensen. I know you spent 2 hours in traffic, so we appreciate your attendance. Okay, that's the end of our business calendar, and we have the updates on the reports. Number E, status of the SB1 funds.
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair. William Galvez, representing Public Works. I wanted to provide ETAC with a general overview of several funding programs that are being covered by SB1 funds. The SB1 funds, although it's coming from the increase in gas tax, is a little bit confusing because those funds are being used to fund several programs. So I wanted to highlight a few of the programs that SB1 funds are providing money for, and they talk about certain deadlines that are coming up, and so there's some confusion because there's different programs with different deadlines and different guidelines. So I wanted to provide you with a summary of the primary programs. First and foremost is the Road Repair and Accountability Account. That's really funding that's used as traditional gas tax for road repairs. And so the funds are apportioned per capita. So the larger cities will get more funding, the smaller cities will get less amount of funding. So the amount of funding that Santa Ana is getting, there's no question as to how much we're getting. We just need to make sure that we appropriately qualify for the funding. The way that occurs is that we submit the streets and the road repairs that are going to be done under that program. They're typically done as part of the budget, so next year they'll be in the budget. This year, because the funding didn't become available until after budgets were done, we submitted a special a packet through the City Council to fund those 4 programs that are indicated. And so then that was submitted before the deadline of October 16th. So I think that we're complying with that part of the program.
Do you want me to wait until the end, or do you want to handle each program individually?
Could I just,
Yeah, go for it.
if it's okay, could I just go through each program? I think really I was going to talk mostly about the road repair program, because that's kind of where the city has the most discretion. The other programs are a little bit more on the competitive side. For the active transportation program, it's a competitive program, and the applications were due August 1st. We did comply with that deadline. We did submit 3 applications to meet that deadline. Next year, we can revisit the projects that we submit. For the local partnership program, which is the third main program, the guidelines are not yet available. They'll be coming out next week or in a couple of weeks. So we'd be happy to go through those guidelines when they're available. Then there's also a sustainable transportation planning grant. This is a program that the city has been actively pursuing. Some of the complete streets work in the downtown area, and some of the other active transportation planning has been done under that program. We didn't have any new projects to submit, although the deadline is not until the 20th. We're still looking for eligible planning grants to submit. So that's where if ETAC has any comments, we'd gladly take those into consideration, because the deadline is coming up on October the 20th. And then there's a third program that's a sizable amount. There are some other programs, but this third program, I put it in there because it's $700 million per fiscal year, but it's for transit and intercity rail capital programs. So generally MTA, OCTA, the Southern California Regional Rail Authority, and so some of those other large transit and rail operators are the ones that qualify. So unfortunately, we won't. The streetcar possibly, since it's being operated by OCTA, possibly OCTA could pursue some funding for the streetcar. But I think that because it's more of an operational side and the streetcar is fully funded for design and construction at this time, I would defer to OCTA to see if they would be after pursuing any funds under that program. So I just wanted to give you kind of a recap of the primary programs that are out there. And again, there's a lot of confusion even with staff, because there's different programs, different deadlines, different amounts, and some are competitive and some are per capita. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Does our committee have any questions, please?
I just circled one here, sustainable, and circled matching funds, because that's been a hot topic. Is there any concern about getting matching funds if they are required?
Yes, and that's where we try to work with the budget. The budgets, as you know, begin with a mid-year review in December and January, and that kind of gives you a springboard to start drafting the budget in February. So it's in February that we kind of start looking at these grants to seeing if there's matching fund requirements, and we try to start piecing together what the applications would look like, how much money you're going after, and how much the city has to budget. So sometimes, even though the fiscal year doesn't start until January 1st, unless it's in the budget when it comes to matching funds, it may be something that's a moot point for that fiscal year. We'd probably have to wait an entire fiscal year cycle in order to pursue a program that's funded using city matching funds. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but that's a key point, and it's a great question.
Can you describe some of the sustainable transportation planning projects that the city's already received funding for?
The downtown complete streets, that was an outreach and planning effort that I think occurred a couple of years ago. And maybe Zed can elaborate details on that one. There are some other grants that we've also, there are some other sustainable planning grants that we've also pursued. And I don't know if you know offhand, Zed, as to any others.
No, I don't recall, because to be honest with you, we received funding for some of the planning grants through ATP. So I don't know, right now I know there's at least another one that we received through SCAG. Oh, actually the other one is we have an educational project right now that we received through SCAG, but it's not under the planning and sustainability parameters. But we do have other planning like the downtown, or not the downtown, 20% Anna Complete Street, that's a planning type of document that was completed. We also have the citywide Safe Rock to School study, again, planning type of project. And we also have the active transportation planning document as well. And I think with those, I mean, like Roland mentioned, we're trying to find another project to apply for, but I think we've actually got all of the major projects that we need funded. So any input you guys have on that to give us an idea to pursue the time for us would be well appreciated.
I'm curious if there's been any sort of complete streets planning or any of that around the Santa Ana Regional Transportation Center that continues beyond just connecting Santa Ana Boulevard to the district, so that it continues beyond to Grand and that area. You know, a lot of what we've done so far is done complete streets planning from downtown to the train. And we tend to stop right there. And so I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to apply to create some complete streets plans for the I hate to use the term because station district is well, whatever. The sort of the station district, right? The area not just connecting downtown to the train, but the neighborhoods around the train station and into all the way over into Grand. We've started to add bike lanes on Grand and all that. I'm curious if that might be an opportunity for us to receive some planning grants.
I guess I have to turn it off for a second.
Would you introduce yourself, please?
Zach Piccolo with the city's traffic engineering. Actually, that's a very good idea. That's something we could probably look at exploring. I do know that as part of the active transportation plan, that's going to be a citywide connection network. So that may still be part of that. So let me sit down with Corey and see if that's something that, if it's not going to be part of the active transportation grant, which is already funded, we'll start looking at applying for something like that. But we definitely want to have connection citywide. We have focused in the area of greatest need right now, which is quite frankly the downtown. There's a lot of pedestrians, bicycle activity, and we are slowly building the network. So it's going to take us time to get there, but I do agree with you that we need to make sure that we go just beyond the downtown.
Yeah, and I would say it's the downtown and central Santa Ana is where the greatest need is.
Absolutely.
And we've already done the central complete streets, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It's been wrapped up.
And there's no further planning required around in that area. We've got the complete streets plan done, and is it Kimberly Horn that's doing the design for the South Main improvements at the moment?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to add, Rate Street's pretty bad when you go north of First. Is Rate qualified for something like, for some of this funding to repave Rate?
Yes, it is, and we'll be looking at Rate Street as part of the next fiscal year. So we have a consulting firm that's reassessing all of the streets citywide, and so then If rate qualifies for the funding as the next streets to do in that packet, then we will put it in the budget, and then we could possibly have a rate qualify for the next cycle, which would be for, of course, fiscal year 18-19. But it all starts with the budget starting in February. So yes, we would look at that, and we could gladly report to ETAC as to how the streets, the street assessment, which is the pavement management, once we complete the street assessment citywide, we'd be happy to provide a summary to ETAC as to what our streets look like.
Very good. Two more questions. One, this is going to go in front of the voters in November of 2018. If this fund is voted down, this 10 cents tax on gasoline turnaround, is it going to affect any of these projects that we asked money for?
I'm not sure I understand the question correctly.
Okay, I believe, my opinion.
Signatures are currently being collected too.
Yes, yes. Well, especially when you're coming back east, and we're almost $1 now difference between Detroit and gasoline prices here, if you can believe it. But my personal feeling is it's going to be a long-lived tax, and unfortunately, because we truly need it. I'm supportive of it. But if suddenly the voters turn it down in November of 2018, are any of these funds under jeopardy of being lost?
That's a good question. I really don't know offhand. Certainly, the funding that we get for the first program, which is the road repair and accountability account, that program is very similar to gas tax. So basically, it'd just be a huge reduction, a huge impact in gas tax. So obviously, we wouldn't be able to fund the projects that are in the queue. So I imagine, yes, if the funding is cut, then yes, those projects would be jeopardized. That's kind of looking down the line. I'm not aware of how, from a legal standpoint, legal mechanism and a financial statewide mechanism, how that works.
Yeah, just a comment on that, and then a couple of questions. The City Council Legislative Affairs Committee discussed this at our last meeting, and they're keeping an eye on it, along with the Council of Cities. And they described it as being, the effort is well underway to collect signatures, and it being described as a potential win for one of the parties in the state, and so there's going to be a lot of money spent on repealing that. So anyway, I hope it doesn't happen. But a question I have is around a couple of the projects. One is the First Street pedestrian improvements. Is that widening the sidewalk on First Street to match the new painted lanes?
That one will be widening the sidewalk by 3 feet.
Yeah. Okay. And then the Euclid Street rehab and the Westminster Avenue rehab. Usually when you rehab streets, you also rehab the sidewalks along with them. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So those, the slurry seals, obviously, those only affect the pavement. But the Euclid rehab and the Westminster rehab, those would both include also sidewalk rehab.
We would perform the sidewalk repairs and any wheelchair ramps that don't meet the compliance, and this is almost a perfect segue into the presentation coming up.
Okay, great. And I would just ask that we keep in mind, and this is just a more general comment, that if we ever need to re-pour curbs, that's a great opportunity to install bulb outs. And so curb bulb outs that make the length of street that pedestrians have to cross actually physically shorter. So that was recently installed in my neighborhood, and it's made a huge difference in terms of the feel of crossing those streets. So I just would hope that I haven't seen the plans for Euclid or Westminster rehab, or whether bulb outs are even appropriate in those areas, but if they are, then I'm hoping that we're at least looking into whether that's a possibility. And then otherwise, just I want to thank staff. I know a few of us have asked for this item to come before us, and so I just want to thank you for coming and giving an update and listing it all out and explaining what the different project areas are.
Just a couple more questions. Number one, is there any tie-in with the street diet with any of this funds? Do you have to?
We call it road buffet.
Road buffet?
Whenever we have whenever the staff has determined that we may proceed with a road buffet, yes, we would certainly build streets to the latest standards, including sidewalk repairs, wheelchair ramps, bulb outs, any other complete streets and pedestrian safety improvement features that we've come up citywide. We're starting to design streets with those features incorporated, and so you will see these streets built with a preferential treatment to pedestrians and bicyclists. So the answer is yes. If there are any road buffets, any road diets, we would incorporate those into our streets. We would stripe the streets accordingly with narrower lanes on arterial streets to slow traffic down, with possibly less lanes or a reduced number of lanes in some of these secondary arterials and collector streets throughout the city.
Okay. Is there anything that on Bristol, since we're still going through the widening, that would qualify for any of these funds?
Yes, Bristol qualifies for some of these funds. However, Bristol has its own funding sources, and so we're still trying to work on those funding sources to exhaust them before we would ever go for these funds that we're trying to spread out to the rest of the city. OCTA had designated, I want to say $125 million for Bristol Street. So we're still trying to exhaust those funds. We're matching those funds with some other funds. So again, Bristol has its own funding sources. We've also used funding to purchase properties along Bristol streets. And so it's getting to the point where the city really needs to divest themselves of these properties, because those properties were used, where funding was used for Bristol to purchase these properties. We really need to dispose of those properties, and then that funding would go back into Bristol Street. So we're right at that stage. Hopefully we can continue with the Bristol phases of construction, and we would then be looking at future phases of Bristol Street, and then maybe we would look at this kinds of funding into the future for Bristol.
Thank you.
I promise, last question. You just touched on an item around all the properties on Bristol. And I know that there's been a lot of discussion around possibly placing any of those in a land trust. Is that, you described that we are going to divest and essentially sell those lots in order to fund the rest of the improvements of Bristol. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
The funding used for Bristol Street, although specifically designated for Bristol Street, is the way the funds are legally used is very similar to gas tax. So if funds are used for acquisition of properties, which is allowed under gas tax, if those properties are sold or reconfigured and sold in any way, the funding has to go back to its source. And so the source is for Bristol Street. So in order for those properties to be set aside for some other purpose, it's possible, but really the city would have to cover the cost or the value of that property. And so regardless of what the disposition of the property is, the funding must go back to its source. And so that's exactly where we're at today. We actually have a list of properties that we're compiling, and this is citywide, not just Bristol Street. And we are also engaging a consultant that will tell us what's the best way to divest for the city to divest itself of these properties, for primarily for Bristol Street, because that's the funding concern. But there are some other properties citywide that we're trying to figure out what to do.
Thank you, William. Well, I guess it's up for our sidewalk non-motorized study.
Let Good morning, everyone. My name is Zed Kakula. I'm with the city's traffic engineering section. And I'm here this morning to talk to you guys about the recently completed sidewalk and non-motorized study. In terms of a little bit of background, this study really focused primarily on pedestrian needs. As you guys are all very familiar, Santa Ana has a very high pedestrian activity throughout the city. If you look at the downtown, it's very vibrant. Why? Because of all the pedestrians that are in the area. Or if you go to many of the schools throughout the city, if you go there when the kids are going to or from school, you'll know that there's a tremendous amount of kids walking to and from school. Some of the elementary schools have up to 80% of their student body that walk to and from school. And it's also important to keep in mind the mere fact that many of the busiest bus stops in the county are right here in Santa Ana. So it's very clear that pedestrian mobility is important to our residents. And to be able to maintain mobility, it requires having a well-developed and maintained pedestrian network. But to do that, you need to be able to know the conditions of your sidewalks, your wheelchair ramps. By knowing the condition, that allows you to determine what deficiencies, if any, exist and what are the needed repairs. Once you know that information, that then allows you to actually effectively develop a methodology to track, plan, and prioritize improvements. This study actually allowed us to address those two last bullets on this slide. So how did we do it? Well, we started off by reaching out and hiring Cole Incorporated. Cole Incorporated is a nationally recognized firm that specializes in sidewalk assessments. So if you look at the screen up there, the way they did it is they use, I guess the pointer doesn't work on the screen there, but they used this high-tech Segway. Why do I say high-tech? Because it had so many gizmos and gadgets on it, gyroscopes, sensors, computers, camera, you name it, it had it. So what they did is they took the Segway and they actually rode it on every single sidewalk throughout the entire city. The neat thing is, as they were riding the Segway through the sidewalks, yes?
Excuse me, is that in residential as well?
Absolutely. Every single sidewalk throughout the city. So as they were riding the sidewalks, I'm not sure if you drive a Segway or you ride a Segway, so if I'm using the wrong term, let me know. But the data that we're collecting included the running slope and cross slope. These are just the angles of the sidewalk. It also identified on the upper right the displacement. These are the areas where the sidewalk is uplifting, which could be potential trip hazards. It also identified protrusions, which are primarily due to landscaping outgrowing over the sidewalk. And then it also identified obstructions, which are primarily utility poles, it may be a fire hydrant, some other physical structure that prevents someone from using that sidewalk at that location. Additional information, and one that was very critical for us, is identifying areas that have missing sidewalk. It also identified areas where cracking is present, and cracking is also a potential trip hazard because if the crack is wide enough, you end up with a gap where someone could trip or someone roll on a skateboard, the wheels could get caught there and have the rider continue moving forward. The last thing that they identified in terms of sidewalk was the spalling. That's where the sidewalk is just kind of has a rough texture where some of it is just peeling off. In terms of wheelchair ramps, that's primarily focused at intersection. They identified locations that had potential hazards such as trip hazards. They also identified whether or not a location had a wheelchair ramp or not. The two pictures shown on the left, amazingly, one of them is actually the school crossing, and as you can see, it has no wheelchair ramp. They identified obstructions, if there's utility poles or anything else on the wheelchair ramp. They also identified whether or not truncated domes, which are ADA requirement, are present at the locations with wheelchair ramps. And then finally yes. Truncated, I should have put a picture on that. A truncated dome is, if you guys walk around, you'll see them at the wheelchair ramps. It's hard plastic. It's either in the city we have yellow, black, or gray, and they have the little bumps on there, and that's just to indicate to someone who's visually impaired that they're about to cross into active traffic. And then the last thing that identified in wheelchair ramps are those that are non-compliant. In other words, maybe the ramp is too steep, the crosswalk, the wheelchair ramp is too narrow. What happened is, because of funding limitations, we weren't able to actually, even though they had all this high-tech equipment, to actually physically measure the slopes at the wheelchair ramp, we're talking about a ton of extra money. So the best we could do is have them do a window survey. So they actually went to all of the intersections, they stopped, they got out, they visually assessed them. And if you know what a wheelchair ramp should look like, it's quite easy to say, hey, yeah, this one doesn't look right. Case in point, truncated dome or not. You know, you visually see it. And some of them are so old, you're like, wow, is that really a wheelchair ramp? So that's how they identified those. The important thing for us is we know where to go look and identify these issues now. So when the study was completed, or the survey, we ended up with a ton of information. So we had to find a way to prioritize this. So a methodology was developed. The way it was prioritized, so each of these locations that had some deficiency, we identified and gave a activity score. So the activity score was reliant on the exact location and the proximity and the type of land uses adjacent to that location. So for instance, if we had a location that is next to a school, we know quite well that there's going to be a lot of people crossing that location. You know, if you compare that to a location that's more an industrial area, pedestrian activity is far less. The other thing we did is we added a second score, which is the severity of the assessment. So a location, for instance, say we had an uplift where the sidewalk was uplifted. If we had one that was uplifted by say 4 inches, that one was going to get more score or higher score than a location that may have been 1/4 of an inch. So we ended up combining both of the activity score and the severity score to come up with a total ranking. This allowed us to prioritize every single thing that was surveyed citywide. This allows us to focus more so on those areas of higher need. This is the sheet that I actually passed out to you. Yeah, and I was right. It's kind of hard to see on the screen. This is one of the sample sheets. The survey looked at all of these block by block basis. The really neat thing about the survey is the mere fact that we have it integrated into GIS. So we could query, identify specific deficiencies. Earlier today, William was talking about the CIP projects. I mean, we could totally tap into this and figure out what's missing on those locations. What I want to just point out is if you guys see the top and the bottom, there's 2 colored lines. I was talking about the Segway operator actually riding the sidewalks. That is the exact path that was followed by the Segway operator. The different colors represent the different slopes of the curbs, or the sidewalks, I should say. And then it also identifies, kind of on the lower right, there's a red box. That's an area that identifies either a missing wheelchair ramp or a wheelchair ramp that has to be replaced. So this visually identifies everything we know in terms of the sidewalk deficiencies. Now, just some of the quick findings. I mean, prior to the survey, I'm not sure if we knew some of this information that I'm about to share with you, but it would seem logical that we wouldn't know it. How many miles of sidewalk do we actually have? Well, now we know. We have 696 miles. What I found interesting is that there's only 10.3 miles of missing sidewalk. It may seem like a lot, but if you look at the entire network overall, that's less than 2% of sidewalks missing in Santa Ana. Obviously, we want to replace those or install them, but I was surprised. I thought it was actually a higher amount. We also identified about 1,700 areas that have utility poles or some other obstruction that impedes pedestrians from walking through there. We also identified about 300 sidewalk gaps, potential trip hazards. They have to be addressed. Now, in terms of the wheelchair ramps, when we apply for grants, I've always wondered how many wheelchair ramps we have. Well, again, now we know. We have about 7,393 wheelchair ramp locations. And of those, we have a total of about 1,600 missing. That breaks out to be about 1/4 of all locations. So right away, we determined that there's a high need for wheelchair ramps. So now that the survey was completed, I mean, it's good that we now have a detailed citywide survey that we know the existing conditions of all of our sidewalk and wheelchair ramps. And now we could start focusing on cost. Well, if we were to replace every single item that was identified that may be major or minor deficiencies, it will be well over $100 million to repair everything. So based on the prioritization methodology that we developed, we're focusing on the higher priority items. So the total cost to repair all the higher priority items would be about $47 million. Of those $47 million, if we focus down a little bit more, I mentioned the missing sidewalks. I mentioned the missing wheelchair ramps. To replace those, that's what we call the hard barriers. That'd be about $10.6 million. And the other last bullet here that refers to the traffic safety, those are the trip hazards. So if we have areas where the sidewalk is raised up, and the ones that have 3/4 or greater, to repair all of those will be about $426,000. Moving forward, we definitely have a couple of...
Zeb, excuse me, one quick question I
Yes.
have. Of that 426,000, those are ones, and we have a lawyer here, could, if repaired, would prevent lawsuits for, I mean, those things, potential lawsuits of tripping.
Absolutely.
So they should be extremely high.
Yes.
Not that kind of. I thought that was your ambulance outside, but.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, those are the ones that we receive claims on. So we know those are high priority. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to debate that. So just to kind of conclude, I do want to mention some of the funding opportunities that we've identified. We do have liability funds that we're actually tapping into as we speak. We're talking about those trip hazards, those $426,000. They're being identified as we speak, and a project is being developed so that we could get those all repaired. We also have the Smart Street program that's going to be taking place, or even any kind of CIP project. Anytime we have any street improvement project, we now know what information is needed or what improvements are needed on the sidewalks. So we're going to bundle that with any CIP project, be it through SMART funding or grant funding projects. So we know the information we need. We just have to get going and incorporate those as part of those CIP projects. The last thing I want to talk about is the grants. I mean, the ATP grants has sidewalk inventory upgrades written all over it. Those are really geared for pedestrian improvements. We actually tested the waters last cycle, and we actually did a sidewalk improvement project for one of the elementaries. We got the money. So I know these type of grants will be very competitive. And one of the nice things that we have now, since we have the information on GIS, and I mentioned earlier that we also have a current citywide Safe Route to School project. What we're planning on doing is taking this information, layering it over all of the Safe Route to Schools for every school in the city, develop a project, apply for those grants. And we know those work, and they're very competitive. So I'm looking forward to having quite good success with those grants. So with that, that's a quick overview of the study. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
I have a quick comment. I wanted to commend Zed for an awesome job in overseeing this project. I know that this program took quite some time to actually get the consultant, get the work done. We had a lot of technical challenges that Cole, even though they have that specialized equipment, we weren't getting the information in the format we wanted, so that took quite some time. So Zed, you did an awesome job. And then just one other last comment. We've measured basically the conditions of sidewalks and wheelchair ramps citywide. So the job now is to do the work, right? But we also have to reassess. So I imagine in 5 or 10 years, we're going to do the same thing over again, and we'll be able to see if we're going in the right direction. And of course, conditions change. So this is something that's going to be ongoing. Thank you.
Comment. Madam Chair?
Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that comment. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say before. And I'm sometimes can be a little critical of staff where I think they've failed or been negligent or something of the sort, but in this case, I really appreciate this efforts and they're very proactive. I love information power, and so you got information. I think this is a wonderful resource. I really appreciate, the holistic viewpoint that you garnered with the study.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to agree with that because I just quickly a little math. I don't know how fast that swayway moves, but 4 miles per hour, that's a lot of hours to cover 700 miles. I really want to propose we go for the next 4 so we get to 700, so we get that sidewalks. But question also, is this available to the public?
It is not available as of right now, but if you need a copy of it, we'll be happy to provide it. Now, just keep in mind, it is a huge, huge file for the data. We do have the report, which is available, but the report itself, the appendices, the ones that I handed out, it's like gigabytes. It's a really massive document.
You can be expecting an email from me for that data later.
Oh, I
today,
expect
so.
it.
I definitely think we should make that available to the public. So at least the data and preferably the like a way to look at the map if that's technically feasible with the platform that we have. But I do want to echo just the congratulations and the thanks that have been expressed. This is really incredible to see, knowing exactly, being able to pinpoint exactly where missing pedestrian infrastructure is. I mean, I'm at a loss for words because of how happy I am. So I appreciate you taking the time, again, especially the piece about being proactive. Some of these things I wouldn't have even thought of in terms of these commercial driveways not being appropriate, and so just again, thank you, and I'm really happy that we have this information now. So great job.
Okay, just one last comment. Just wanted to make sure that all of the ETAC committee members are aware. This is something that we've been coordinating and checking with our city attorney's office, because some of this information has safety-related information. Allow us, the information could be made available, but please give us an opportunity to complete the review with the city attorney's office to see in what form this information can be made available. I know that it can be made available, but maybe some of it will have to be redacted. So,
and just a note on the liability piece, and especially as it relates to the safe routes to school, I really appreciate that we're going down that direction. LA, you probably know, how to pay millions of dollars for a route that was marked safe route to school and was anything but safe, and had to pay a multi-million-dollar lawsuit because of a fatality there. So I really appreciate us being proactive, and especially looking at that as it interrelates to the routes to school. So.
Excuse me. Can you please explain me what are you referring to, the total safety $426,000?
That is very much focused on areas where. Let me actually show. See if you can see that picture. Right there, the picture on the upper right, it shows where the sidewalk is uplifted. So what we're focusing on that specific item, the 426,000, is to replace all of the areas that have the sidewalk uplifted more than 3/4 of an inch. And that's citywide, and that's actually being worked on as we speak.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, I have a question. When you said that you're tapping your liability funds, how do you do that? I mean, you borrow them or you use them, or I've never heard that terminology.
That's a funding source that's managed by the city manager's office and risk management. They're funded on an annual basis to cover lawsuits and that kind of thing. With the former city manager, David Cavazos, we realized that we were getting lots of trip and fall claims, and this study was underway. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do? Well, at the end of the study, let's just set aside some funding that we're normally using for these trip and fall claims. Let's just fix the sidewalks and eliminate these claims. So we were able to, through the city manager's office, tap into those funds. And I think we were provided, I want to say, $3 million. That $3 million was used for sidewalk repair, emergency repairs 2 or 3 years ago. It was used to fund the study that was done by Cole. And then we've also made some other street improvements that were very closely tied to pedestrian safety. They weren't exactly trip and fall hazards, but I think we built some bulb outs. We also got some of these improvements done in front of City Hall for just trying to slow traffic down in between the county building and City Hall. And then we also have, I want to say, $500,000 set aside for the next trip and fall repair project, which is at $426,000. Staff is right now putting a bid packet together, identifying every trip and fall that's greater than 3/4 of an inch. So our intent is to repair all of that. So that kind of gives you an overview of the liability funds.
So is it a liability fund for all of the city, or is it a liability fund just for street safety? How does that liability fund work?
I think it's a liability fund citywide. I can't comment any more. That's probably the limit of my knowledge. Somebody from risk management would probably have to be accessed so that maybe they can comment more. But my understanding is that it covers city liability citywide.
So you don't have to pay back or look for grants or anything to pay that $3 million. That's like borrowed out of that liability fund.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So do we have any comments, any further comments from staff today?
Yeah, I have one comment. It's not very, very good news. We have somebody from our street maintenance that's actually was working watering median trees that was involved in an accident yesterday. My understanding is that the employee was pinned between the area that was coned off, and he was actually watering median trees, and this occurred yesterday afternoon, and my understanding was that the gentleman's in a critical condition. So just wanted to share that. I don't have any other information other than that.
Mike, would you like any comments to wrap up here?
Not really.
Mr. Bauer?
Yeah, I mean, condolences, to the injured. It's an employee of the city?
Yeah.
And it sort of underscores the need to be done with this sort of ad hoc approach that we have to watering the medians in this manner. So certainly don't want to use that incident, to our advantage in that sense. But it certainly underscores to me that this is not the way things should be done. Thank you.
Carl?
Okay, just some of the things we see, I do want to thank staff for hard work and what they do. I would like to recommend that we review in our meetings in the near future of Bristol Street, where we stand, what we have to do, and get a good handle on what's happening. I would like to ask staff, what is our procedure when it comes to replacing fire hydrants? At the last meeting, I talked about the one that was missing on Bear Street, and it took me 2 more weeks to get to the fire department, who finally was the one who apparently, after 2 days after talking with them, and this is after I had reported for 2 weeks, they finally got it replaced. And so it's one of those things that, yes, it is guess whether you're going to need it or not. But if those people needed it, it wasn't there on it. So I don't know what our review. What our procedures are when you get a call saying a fire hydrant's out.
We can provide an overview on that at a future meeting. I think our water department has a really good handle as to where they're missing. Sometimes maybe there's a disconnect in getting that information and performing the street improvements. Obviously, if we're going to perform street improvements, major type, where we're going to do bulb outs and major improvements, we should also do the utility improvements for our sewer and water. So,
and this was interesting because the contractor put new cable in the street, and he's the one that damaged it. And right after the meeting from here, someone said something to him because there was a tree leaning. They had knocked a tree down. They knocked the fire hydrant down. The tree leaning was immediately taken down. That was great. But it took another 2 weeks for the fire hydrant to get replaced. Also, that should have been the contractor's responsibility because it was damaged by him, not the city. So I don't know whether that contractor was charged for that later, or I don't know how that procedure works.
Yeah, good point. Just from my experience in dealing with our own water utilities or city-owned water utilities, sometimes even though the city crews are doing the replacement work, that doesn't mean that the city's paying for it. Because the water system is, we're very, very concerned about water quality. Sometimes we will just charge the contractor and we'll do the work ourselves because it has to be a certified contractor. So I can look into the matter if you have a specific location, but I think in general we can touch on the master planning and our water and sewer system and how we deal with that at a future meeting.
It was right on Bear Street, just north of MacArthur. And the last thing I mentioned it last time, I still like to have one of these meetings schedule a review of where we put circles, turnarounds, whatever you want to call them, and where we don't. Roundabouts there, I think.
We haven't forgotten. We're still working on something to provide.
Yeah, Bruce, I are an engineer, so your Ninth Street's a 4-letter word, so
I'm shocked to hear about the injury to the tree watering crew. I'm I'm at a loss for word on this one. Like it just underscores, like Commissioner Bauer said, it underscores just how important it is that we make sure folks are not.
I just received an update this morning. So the employee's name is Ismael Castellan, and so of course he's in a hospital.
Ismael what?
Ismael Castellan. And this is an email that's been distributed citywide to employees, so that's why I can offer that information. And it was yesterday at 3:35.
Wow.
Say what location was, I'm sorry.
It doesn't say that.
Yeah, so I hope for a speedy recovery for him. Other than that, just a couple of comments. Just one note around, I think it was 4th and Main. There, speaking of pedestrian improvements and trip hazards, 4th and Main, there we have brick pavers, and that the southwest corner has already been repaired and patched up with asphalt, and now other brick pavers, they're kind of coming up together and buckling, and then also getting knocked loose, and so it seems worse than just a straight up sidewalk that's lifted because it's brick and all that. So I see people trip there, so I would just hope that we go out there and patch that up. And then there's a street sign that was hit on Santa Ana Boulevard that's leaning up against a tree. It broke the concrete surround for the water meter. So it's broken, and this street sign is leaning over on the tree. I think it's been like that for about a week. So that's on Santa Ana Boulevard and Mortimer, I believe. And yeah, other than that, just want to thank staff for continuing to bring these items to us. I'm very happy that we're dealing with transportation issues. I'm also really thankful for our ability, for staff being open to some unique and creative solutions to our watering issues, with the Irvine Ranch Water District, and hopefully we can have that project pay for a drip system. So I really appreciate you being open to working with Irvine Ranch on that. And other than that, I will see you all next month.
Okay. Regarding the Seagramstrom Avenue there, West Seagramstrom, I'd like to request staff to send the arborist out to review that palm tree, because from the picture right now, it looks like the palm tree is so close to that young camphor, and that by removing that palm tree, that will allow the camphor to grow. And right now, if we replace the palm tree, it will not let that camphor grow because it's too close to it. And it will not reach out because it sees the obstruction there. So can we have our arborist go out and look at that to see if it's wise to actually replace that palm tree, or if it's better for that camphor to have that space to grow?
Madam Chair, may I suggest that when the item comes back to ETAC, that we have our arborist here to provide ETAC with information and his assessment of the tree.
Perfect.
His or her assessment of the tree. Because at this point, I know that a decision by ETAC's been made, and so we're following that direction. But we can provide you with the arborist and the assessment, and you can ask the question directly at the next.
Because we can say, let's plant the tree, but that little camphor there's
Yes.
hanging on at the end. Okay. A follow-up. Our website, city website still states that the ETAC Commission has no responsibilities right now because it's under review. Since we've made those responsibilities, and I'm requesting that is updated, and it does detail our explanations, such as the municipal code for the ETAC. That we're working under, because I don't think when it was taken down, it's not been put back up. And that is, let's see, what is that municipal code? Do you know what I speak?
Yes, I know what you're referring to, Madam Chair.
Okay. And then also on our website where we have the trees, the write-up says, we plant trees in the fall of the year, and the copy is talking about how many trees we plant. Well, since we haven't planted any trees in 4 years, maybe we'd like to update that copy and not explain to our public that we're planting trees, or alluding to the fact that we're planting trees every fall.
Yes, we will update that, and just know that generally speaking, we follow what the budget calls for. In this case, we kind of have some issues up in the air. I know that we're providing...
We don't want to plant any trees, and that's fine, but I think the direction of what that states on there, we could word it better or guide it a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. What I was referring to is that I know that trees are going to be an issue where we may have to provide an update mid-year. We might not necessarily have to wait until the next fiscal year when the budget changes, but that's generally when we try to provide an updated summary of whatever information we have. And I'm not aware of exactly what you were talking about.
In the whole body, it just says, we plant all these trees in the
Right.
fall of the year. This is what we do.
Right. So
this is how we do it.
We'll revise that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Gil.
When you're done, I'm just having one question.
Okay, wanted to ask the follow-up on the signing at the St. Joseph's Church where our post person was killed, and you were going to make some changes there at that intersection. Have those been done yet?
I'm sorry, what was it? What location? I don't recall.
St. Joseph's Church.
There's been,
So there, Ms. Hanson was killed there at that intersection. You sent out a team of people to look at the changes that were going to be made immediately to that intersection with some overhead, different signing.
I could speak to that.
yeah, go ahead.
We actually did, is this on?
Yeah.
We did actually have a project where the beacons were replaced. So if you go out there right now, we do have the rectangular rapid flashing beacons in place out there, and some of the signage was replaced as well. So we actually have 3 of those out there. I think one of them, the contractor, for whatever reason, didn't install it, so we're working on him. But I think that's the last thing that's missing. But the beacon and the signs have been replaced.
Thank you. And I would like to put on the agenda for the next meeting the update that goes for the trees before the city council, and to have the ability that ETAC hears what is being prepared for that update in response to my Tuesday presentation to city council. Gil.
Just wanted to, sorry, I forgot to mention it during my comment. Just wanted to update the rest of the commissioners. I'm the ETAC representative on the general plan update, and we're nearing the end of that. And right now we've done, the last meeting was on the urban design element. And so as urban design relates to traffic and transportation and all the pieces that we deal with, those items were discussed. So things like focus intersections, essentially where two arterials come together, and how you design those intersections, walkability, and building materials, and how and landscaping, and how that affects folks who are in the roadway and on the sidewalk. So just wanted to give an update that that's still occurring. that was the urban design piece, and the next piece next month will be the land use element.
Yes, Carl.
I'm sorry, I should add this later, but I want to thank Janelle for an excellent presentation from the council. I think we finally got our message across, and I think what a very, unfortunately, what an appropriate time with this employee being injured. That's not a thing we took into effect or consideration, but obviously I wish him the best of recovery, and it just emphasized the point of what we needed to do. But thank you for your presentation.
Okay, I'd like to make sure that we do have a pre-meeting with William prior to the November 14th meeting to go over the agenda. We missed this month, and I would be very grateful. I'd like to close the meeting in honor of and the prayers for Mr. Castiglione. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.